Noch 3 Minuten. Let's continue with the recording. So welcome again, everybody who just joined. Happy to welcome you here today. With me is Ulrich Reinke from SAS.
Hello.
Welcome, Ulrich. Nice that you have found the time to be here with us. What will be the topic of today? What are you going to talk about?
From emergency situation in Corona times to risk of security operations with nowcasting and resource optimization.
Cool, sounds pretty interesting. I was just amazed also by your curriculum vitae. So when I was looking at your bio and was reading through it, which was quite interesting. You are currently a principal data scientist, right?
Yes.
So do you have a team at SAS you work with, or
actually we are focusing more on industries. So I'm in the insurance team, and we are here 4 data scientists for insurances in the German-speaking region: Switzerland, Germany, Austria. But there are a hell lot of data scientists as us, and we have kind of a virtual community where we have virtual meetings with 20-30 people in the area.
Okay, cool. So it's like a Zoom call, and you just exchange the latest and latest.
Exactly. People show something they realized in a project or ask some questions, and this happens every 2 weeks, I think.
Interesting. How do you stay up to date in your business? Are you just reading stuff, trying things out? Do you find time for that, or is the business too busy?
Well, it's quite busy, but normally, I mean, my way of being informed is if I work with customer problems and you get actually pushed into a corner in a situation where you really have to solve a problem, and then you kind of ask around or read. And the other thing is, of course, our software innovates a lot. So we have lots of trainings and material that you could theoretically always consume, but normally there's no time. So I always pick when I need it.
Interesting, cool. I was just reading through the things that you mentioned in your bio. 25 years, which is pretty much experience in data science. So you have, I think, a good overview about all the developments in the recent years. What do you think is currently most exciting for you? If you look at what kind of methods have been available, made available, what excites you most?
Well, I mean, there's a tendency to get much more into real-time operations with things. So that means that people, human beings, are no longer able actually to stop or interact. And so it has to be done very safely and very compliant. And you have to be very careful, because if things run automatically, they can also create a lot of damage. And so that's the interesting part of it. Then you have all the unstructured data, the text or images, which is now becoming more interesting and much more part of the analysis, and that's changed a lot.
So you also, for you in your business with insurance and in the industry, the images are also there more important, or?
Not yet, but they are all exploring it. Of course, you have to be very careful with pictures being taken. There might be persons on it, to make sure that the data privacy protection is kept there. And so, but there are use cases.
So real-time operations, insurance, and risk addressing. That's interesting regarding your background. So you've been working for Deutsche Börse, so German Stock Exchange.
Yeah.
Was it for the World Bank? What was your position? What was your job there?
At the World Bank, I was a consultant, and I was actually analyzing a huge data bank of international trade tariffs and trade barriers, because the World Bank is a development institution financing credits to developing countries. But some of these projects are only profitable if these countries are able to trade what they produce. So if the trade barriers are eliminated. And The conditions of those loans have to be in a way that the loan becomes profitable, because otherwise they won't be able to pay it back. And so there were lots of analysis being done for lots of projects with respect to trade issues.
I actually stumbled upon the topic of today when I was thinking about what would be next for us here, and the term nowcasting, which sounds pretty interesting. I found it therefore very interesting looking at the current crisis, where data is sometimes really hard to gather and hard to find out, and hard to find out trends and the impact on the economy and the companies. This is something which I found quite interesting. Is it nowcasting? What does it really mean?
Well, let's say like this. Nowcasting is a remedy to a data problem, because I've done lots of data science projects in different countries, applications, and so on. And in general, well, the first discussions, then you ask your customer or the persons who are involved, well, what's the data, where do you get it, and so on. In general, they have some data banks and so on, and you can analyze it. But nowcasting is actually developed for situations where you don't have precise data at the moment. You have data maybe which is older, that is precise, but the data that is from this moment is very bad. And so you should not run machine learning models on bad data, especially if you have some earlier data that is good and data that is up to date that is bad. And so nowcasting is a remedy to this, and I'll talk about a little bit about this. You have to be always in your data science project precise on what is the process that generates the data. Let me give another example from insurances. Sometimes you analyze a data warehouse, customer relationship management, or churn, or something like that. And then you notice this does not work very well. What's the problem? And then you talk with them. What's the segment, customer segment? Oh, this is a portfolio that we bought from another company. And they have totally different data there, missing values and so on. And you have to be clear on this before, because you cannot give it for granted that this is a homogeneous portfolio of customers. So you're analyzing that.
Interesting. I'm really excited, looking forward to a presentation now. In the meantime, so when you start to share your screen, I will give some organizational things to people who have started to join us. You can start to share your screen, Ulrich. So welcome again for everybody who just joined. We are in talks with Ulrich Reinke today. I'm happy to present him here and have him as a speaker. He's an experienced data scientist with a lot of expertise in the field, and I'm happy to have him speak about the topic today. So some organizational things for you, because we are not that passive, of course, if you join us here. Look in the navigation bar, you will find there's a Q&A part. When you click on it, a new window will open. Now you can ask your questions during the presentation. Feel always free to drop a note. I will watch it, I will check the questions you might have even during the presentation. I talked to Ulrich, but we can ask the questions when he is talking. So just feel free and ask the questions. Don't be shy. With probably just not asking questions a bad thing, but not asking questions. Ulrich, happy to have you again, and welcome again. So it's now your floor, and looking forward to what you have to say to us.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan. Okay, let's have a first look. How are we doing at the moment with COVID-19 infections? Here, this is a look of the numbers from Switzerland. These are the numbers in Austria, and these are the numbers in Germany. And you see the large peak is over. We were actually pretty low in June, July. Now at the moment, some of the numbers in all of our countries are increasing a little bit. Some persons are getting worried. And this is what the presentation is about. Should we get worried, and how should we maybe best cope, or public health official cope with the situation. But let's rewind 6 months and go back to the beginning of the story when all began. So I have here the numbers of Germany. The first numbers in Germany, official statistics, were from beginning March. Of course, there was also some corona in the news before from China and a little bit from Italy. But when you looked at the first week of numbers, it looked, okay, it's not so bad. It goes on horizontal. It's not really a problem in Germany. But then the second week, oh, it's really rising. Where are we going here? And then the next couple of days it went down again. And everybody who looked at these numbers was really confused. Sometimes they went up, sometimes they went down. And now I'm sparing all these ups and downs. Now, after the first 6 weeks, we saw there is some pattern in there in the data. And but let's have also a look at the let's say most recent numbers. They were published, and you see there are some blue bars and there are some orange bars. Let's open this a little bit up. The blue bars are cases reported as of the previous day, and the orange bars are cases reported as of today, or of the day there, which was maybe the 5th of May. And if you look...
If I can ask you directly a question here. Robert Koch Institute, for all those who haven't heard about the institute yet, what is it, and what is it?
Well, the Robert Koch Institute is part of the German Health Ministry, and is basically responsible for infectious diseases, more or less, the statistics, and is actually surveying the situation and is advising the government what to do about, or the public what to do. Is a research institute in the health ministry, and they are issuing daily reports on the corona data. I think in Austria it's also a part of the health ministry, and in Switzerland there's also an institute who does it. Okay, so this is official statistics, let's say like this, government statistics. But what are these orange bars? New cases reported as of today. And if you look, those new cases have to be distributed to the past bars of the blue bars, because the new reported cases of today in an infectious disease, these are people who got a positive corona test, and you have to, they have been ill before. So you have to find out since when had they the first symptoms, and since when are they most likely ill and have actually distributed maybe themselves the virus. So if you have a person which enters today in the official statistics, there is actually quite some journey before, no? So before he or she got the positive test result, and before that, a couple of days, he or she took the case, and before that, he had some symptoms, or he encountered another person who told him afterwards, oh, I was tested positive. And if you go back, at some point in time, there was incubation. And in the early stages of the corona development, it took quite some time to get the test and to get the test results. Now you get this maybe even at the airport before you leave. And when your airplane lands in the holiday area, you get the results transmitted via email. But in the early stages, that took quite some time. And once you entered the official statistics, there was the idea of tracing back basically whom you met in the previous time. So they tried to call you from not from the Robert Koch Institute, but from the local area health department, Gesundheitsamt in Germany, and they tried to find out when did you have your first symptoms, telephone interview. And if you were not available at home because you went to work or something else, they could not catch you. And until they found out when you had your first symptoms, they couldn't actually distribute your number into the past. Okay, so finally, we are here detecting serious problems in the data generating process. First, this is a phenomenon, this infection with COVID, which was new to lots of persons and to the health administrations. There was no history of a similar case where it was actually around the globe in so many countries and also with such large repercussions. And so there was no experience to cope with this. Then there is a delay chain in being tested for corona. The number of the reporting and also the federal organization of the German state, which probably is also similar in Switzerland or in Austria. There is not a central institution responsible for those corona reports, but this has actually been cascaded up through the district, the federal state, the region, and so on. So there were lots of delays in this.
You know what's fascinating about it? Is if you have digital data, it's pretty easy. It's just ongoing data stream, and you can add it easily to different paths. I think it's much less a problem. But what I knew from Switzerland, you have in parts had paperwork. So paperwork from physicians, which were sent by fax to the central health center, which is just like causing delays and delays and delays. So depending on the infrastructure you have and digitalized infrastructure, it really can be a nightmare of work.
And by the way, this way of communication was also used in Germany, what I heard, because there was no infrastructure in place. And then there is this bias in the data. So you have a backward uplift of new cases. All those numbers, these blue bars, they will grow over time. Yeah. As time goes on, you get more orange parts added to each blue part. So while you are analyzing this data, the data grows, always in the positive direction. These blue bars will always become more because maybe tomorrow or in 3 days, we test some more people, we get some positive cases, and we have to look back and add them to some of those blue bars. So what do we need is we need imputation of infection onset for those cases where you could not actually call the person who had the positive test, or you did not reach them and you didn't get the information. Then there are also quite some numbers of persons who never had any symptoms. Yeah. So what do you do there? What's the best guess of the infection onset if you never had any symptoms, but you got a positive test for some other reasons, because somebody told you that he was or she was himself positive. And you need a sensible smoothing for weekends because these valleys here in the data are caused by weekends where the people in the health administration did not work that much as on normal weekdays. And you need estimation for all future corrections on today's case numbers. And that is what is a nowcast. And here we have, for example, the nowcast as of mid of April. You see first the blue numbers where you know when the persons had the first symptoms. Then you see the gray bars added on top. These are those people who you could not determine when there were the first symptoms or when the disease began. So this is imputed basically by some kind of statistical modeling. And then you have here that part that is added up, the nowcast, which actually kind of corrects the data for all those numbers that most likely will be added up from future tests that we don't have on file yet. And you see there is some uncertainty with it, and you have the error bar, which is rather large at the nearer past, and which gets very narrow for the past that is much further back. Okay, and once you move on with the data, you see as the number of cases become less, here end of April, the nowcast error bar is also much smaller. How do you achieve a nowcast? There is actually several papers written, and there is a package available implemented in the open source software R, and these are basically here the authors of this this study and this package from R, which you can use. And this is a very interesting part to read. But I do not want to go too much into the details. It's a combination of generalized linear models, which you can do with Python or R or even SAS, in combination with Bayesian statistics. But now we have a nowcast. And you see the curve is smooth. We don't have these valleys for the weekends any longer. And now we can actually divide the numbers of cases from 1 week to the week before. And we get basically information on the reproduction number. And you can see here how this reproduction number actually behaves if you can divide those smooth numbers corrected for all those biases. And you see also the reproduction number, of course, since you have here still error bars on the nowcast, the reproduction number has also a larger opening there with a larger error interval. Well, now let's have a look at time and geography for Germany. And I'm here again quoting the official report from the Robert Koch Institute. This is at the very beginning, early March. You see single cases being reported. 1 week later, you still have single cases cumulated, still until all the numbers from the beginning until the 20th of March, and so on. And by end of the March, the Robert Koch Institute noticed, okay, it makes no sense to report all these cumulated numbers. Let's look at the cases of the last 7 days. And you see actually much better to what extent you have actually hotspots in Germany. Because if you always add up from the beginning, you don't see the hotspots any longer. And you see very much that the southern part of Germany was involved a lot in the early part of the crisis. And I go here week by week. And then you get some of those cases that were in the press with meat processing factories or health and elder care institutions. But then you see here by June, here this is again the case in Gütersloh with the meat processing factory. We have some single cases when it comes up again in certain areas. But the question is, this is now the situation. How shall we live with this, and how to react and plan with these developments for the future? Some people say there will be a second wave. Some people say there will not be a second wave. Will this happen? Should we prepare for this? Yes or no? And so let's have a look.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
since you've introduced nowcasting now with the slides before, in one or two sentences, what's now the benefit of using nowcasting in such a context?
Well, if you maybe remember in one of the first slides, I kind of did some naive forecasting with the red arrow, and I was always overshooting and undershooting. So the nowcasting is actually first correcting those problems that were imminent in the data generating process of this data. And once you kind of clean that up, you can actually use some analysis methods, and hopefully what you derive from it is more viable and can be better used than if you do it with the original data. And that's my experience. I mean, you mentioned before 25 years, quarter of a century of data science. It's always true, 80 to 95% of a project involves improving the data, correcting the data, be precise with the data. And only if we do that, you will get good results that you can really use and you can derive a benefit from it. And that's the case here also with nowcasting.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we look at the problems involved with some of the severe cases of COVID-19, some people from the risk group might have to be hospitalized. And there's a question of having enough capacities. And there's a basic information of what is the potential COVID-19 treatment demand that is based on the density of the population regionally. And I'll do here the case of Bavaria. This is just a selection I did. We have seen Bavaria had lots of cases in the beginning. So this may be a good choice for that. And also that's where I could actually get easily the nowcasting data also. So we have the demand side, the population, and on the other hand, we have the supply side for hospital beds. Also here from the Bundesamt für Statistics, the official statistics, you can actually see how many beds are available in some areas, and you see the density by thousands of population. But let's look at the infection numbers from Bavaria. So this is a detailed look here, and I plotted, in addition to the numbers, the daily numbers, also the weekends. And you can see here these vertical lines are always Saturdays and Sundays. And you see here Easter has also the Friday and the Monday. And you have here the 1st of May weekend also, which is a little bit wider. And you see basically how these valleys in the data are most likely a result of the weekend work in the health department, the health authorities, public health service. Okay, but then we can actually look also at the imputed numbers. Imputed numbers is where you actually correct for the onset of the disease. And here you see for Bavaria a very interesting effect. So the peak of the official numbers here were at the end of March, but the real peak of people being infected and being infectious was in mid-March, here the 16th of March, when the official numbers were still very, very low. And remember, this is once you have to go back the entire reporting chain through result, test received, COVID test taken, symptoms and incubation and infection. And this is an interesting artifact here, which is probably true for most regions, because in the beginning, the system, the health system, was overwhelmed and was not yet working very efficiently. Now, things are very different. Okay, and on top of this, we have the nowcast also, and you see also the numbers are very low, and so the error bar is at the moment, or at least here at the beginning of May, very, very low, because the total numbers of COVID cases were small. But if you want to plan now for hospital beds,
and we see the corrected distribution of the numbers in the yellow bar, right? The yellow chart. Do you have an idea? It might be a hard question. Do you have an idea how long it took to find out that the actual distribution is completely different? In other words, if I look at the dates below in the x-axis, I see sometimes it's a month in between. Did it really take a month to find out that the spike was completely earlier, not in midst of March, end of March?
I remember that I found the publication, I think, shortly after Easter, which is here, this is Easter weekend, so it's 13th of April or something like that, when the big peak in the numbers was over. And then you could actually distribute the numbers not only by tracing back manual paperwork and calling people, but you could also impute and run the model. So, but they were still backward correcting by those cases where you could trace back people. Also the Easter holidays, some people were even actually not at home. No, some of them went somewhere else. Although there was a lockdown, it was not enforced that strictly at that moment in Germany, at least. And but I think it took quite some time to correct those numbers. And as the big load actually decreased, they could actually work the backload of those cases.
I mean, the part I found interesting from a business perspective is that looking at the dates again, it took at least a month to correct it, so which is a pretty long time if in a pandemic environment. And which shows a little bit the hardness of dealing with data scientists in that environment and to find out real conclusions out of it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is also for me the first time I experienced this kind of data in such a situation that while you are analyzing it, it changes constantly, and you never know whether your model is correct until you really understood what was going on with the data. And that was for me basically after Easter, when I kind of found these papers on nowcasting and so on. Before I was just clueless. Yeah? But okay, so now you have the corrected numbers, and nevertheless, we know there is quite a large share of the population who is probably positive, have no symptoms, they don't know anything. So you don't know what the real number is. That's the other thing. So this is nowcasting is not providing you the real number, but just a better guess on the official number. It's smoothing the official number, those who are tested positive. And we know also if you do lots of tests, you get more positive cases than if you do fewer tests. That's another problem with this data. So if you plan for hospital beds in an area, you probably better add a buffer on top of it, a risk buffer. And now some people say it's 10 times more what we have in official numbers, or some people say it's double. We don't know this, but you can actually add this risk buffer, multiply these numbers with a factor and add something else, and then derive based on those experience that we have. So some people say maybe 10% of the positive tested persons, they get seriously ill and they need hospitalization. So you can derive basically those 10% which you need to have maybe hospitalized, whether it's be ICU or just in a station. Let it be, we don't know that. But now you can actually select a date and you see what is the potential demand of hospital beds in Bavaria. Let's put this graphic a little bit smaller here on the top and return to the demand side and the supply side of beds. If I have by zip code resolution the population in Bavaria, and I know I expect now 1,300 hospitalizations for COVID in Bavaria, I can actually simulate based on those cases that are known, that are active in certain areas, and on the population density where those cases might pop up, just using the distribution of the population and using the distribution map of the COVID cases as they were published by the Robert Koch Institute. And on the other hand, I know also the supply side, the hospital beds. I know where are hospitals, how many beds they have available. There is a specific part in the report of the Robert Koch Institute where you see what are the capacities available in certain areas and hospitals. So I can actually simulate, on the one hand, those cases that might pop up. These are the small blue circles based on the geography of Bavaria and the population density, and based on my nowcast. And I can, on the other hand, use the hospital addresses. I know which is zip codes, and I know how many bed capacity they have for COVID patients, because those hospitals, they had to create separate entries to the hospital, separate stations, so they are totally separated from the other part of the hospitals. Some hospitals actually closed all the other parts. And so the big bubbles here are now hospitals with their bed capacities. You see here Munich, the city where you have lots of hospitals. And you see some areas in Bavaria that are not actually catered very well or served very well with hospitals. So the question is now, if you have patients calling emergency 911 or 112 in Germany and need to go to a hospital, to which hospital should they be sent or shipped? And this is what you can solve with optimization, geographic optimization. So you can assign basically to each patient what is the optimal hospital where he or she should go, in order to make sure that you have for each patient a bed available, and on the other hand to minimize travel distance. And this is basically a visualization of this result. And you see some clinics are at the limit. Yeah, for example, you see here basically the capacity, which is the bigger bar, and the smaller bar is always how many beds are used by patients. And you see at least this brown clinic and the green clinic and this yellow clinic, they are at the capacity limits. And they are actually this one here with the 46, this one here with the 61, and this one here with the 121 beds. And I mentioned before, we have this area which is served not very well with hospitals. So this is basically an assignment to the patients where they should be transported or they should travel in order to get treatment. On the other hand, you see the area of Munich has no problems. They're very short travel distance. And let's have a closer look at these numbers. This is actually the report corresponding to this. We see we have 16,000 decision variables, because we have each of these, I forgot how, maybe 1,000 patients in Bavaria that might pop up in the hospitals. Each of them can travel to 20 different hospitals. Yeah, so 1,000 times 20,000, you're getting close to 16,000 travel routes. So that's the first thing. So the number of constraints, 1,100. These are actually rules which have to be obeyed. For example, you cannot fill up a hospital above their capacity of beds. So you have to make sure that you can fill up a hospital only up to the capacity of their beds. You have coefficients in the constraints. In addition, you see here the result, the objective value. These are basically the kilometers, the sum of kilometers traveled. And you see how much time it took to solve this, 0.5 seconds, went very fast. We see here in the solution the plan of the beds. How many patients a hospital has to expect this day. For example, the first one here, the clinic in München-Neuperlach, should expect 29 new patients. You see on the other hand here, the service level basically being expressed by the maximum or the 90%, 75% or the 50 percentile travel distance of those patients. So one patient at least will have to travel 28 kilometers to arrive in this clinic here. But you have some areas, and these are again the clinics which are at the capacity limits, where you have patients that will have to travel 129 or 118 kilometers to reach the clinic. And on the other hand, you get also the opportunity costs. What if I would add one bed in the clinic here in Erding that would reduce the travel kilometer distance on average by 19 kilometers, yeah, for the total travel distance of all patients, yeah. Okay, that was one solution, but I can scroll actually to the front here where we have few cases, and that is more the situation that we have now. We have lots of excess capacities. You see always these clinics are basically not really at the limit, or I can actually, here's a report for it, or I can actually go to the peak that we ever had, that was here, 23rd of March, where we had lots of patients, and you see the assignment that is being done. There's also, for example, here some interesting part. You see these patients, they have to travel here quite a lot. This is because this clinic here is also at the capacity limit. And so this clinic, although it has only very few beds, 28 beds, has to serve this area here because there is no excess capacity here available. While the next clinic here has a lot of excess capacity. Yeah, there are only very few patients assigned to it. Okay, that is a report. Now let's see how we can actually solve this problem. And I see Stefan is laughing, but I think at the end you will understand. It's not that difficult. How to formulate such a problem.
I think it's awesome that you show the code. We love code, so that's perfect.
Okay, all right. I thought we go first from the pictures and then to the coding. But the input data is very, very simple. What do you need? You only need the X coordinate, the Y coordinate, the longitude, latitude. You need the number of persons that are there, the patients. You provide an ID for that patient, maybe a label of that ward, of that village. And you need a type. Is this a patient or is it a clinic? Yeah. You see further down here, we have X and Y's, we have large numbers, but this is of type C, that is a clinic. Yeah? So this, the first part of this table is the demand part, and the second part is the supply part for hospital beds. So you have in one table both the patients and the clinics. You need to know where the patients stop and the clinic begin, and that is basically this number here. Anzahl patients, the number of patients, yeah, if you know that. So we read this table in here. So read data, the clinic and patient, and we read the node ID, the X, the Y, and basically the number, the capacity here for the clinics or the number of patients that are there. The next thing is I need to calculate for each patient, for each small bubble in Bavaria, what is the distance from this place to each of the 20, 30, or 40 clinics that I have available where he could be shipped. So what do? I have here a loop that loops over the patients and the clinics, P's and C's, and I calculate with a function geodistance that actually calculates, if I use here K in kilometers, what's the distance between the patient with his X and Y coordinates and the clinic with X and Y coordinates. So for each combination of patients and clinics, I have now the distance in kilometers. Very easy, one line. The next thing is I have to formulate my objective function. My objective is I want that there's as little road traffic as possible for the patients in sum. So I want to minimize the total distance, travel distance of all patients. And how do I calculate this? I loop in a sum over all edges. An edge is a combination of a patient and a clinic. So basically a combination from this clinic with this one here. And if I have here also a clinic, I would also have a connection here. Yeah. So I mentioned already before, these are about these 16,000 or 20,000 connections that we created through this calculation here.
Ulrich, Jaroslav is asking if it's a bird flight, if you think about distance, or is it the actual real route from patient to clinic?
Yeah, in fact, this is a bird flight, and the real route, you could actually use maybe Google Street Maps, and you could use the Google API. And but for the first instance, this is a very simple assignment with a bird flight, correct, given. But you can then, because the problem is you will not be able to call the Google API with 20,000 calculations in a fast way, because they will actually pace you down if you do that. So what I would recommend, you first calculate the bird flight, we do here, and once you have the solution, then you can actually go for the solution plan and calculate in the Google API what's the travel time, and you might actually then reassign some cases. Yeah. So for that reason, you might actually have some additional slack in the capacity constraints. So you might want to have maybe 5% or 3% additional slack in the capacities, because if the clinic is at the capacity constraint, you cannot assign a patient any longer. But if you plan with initial slack, you can do that afterwards. Yeah. Okay. But so this is the objective function. So we want to minimize the total travel distance, which is basically the decision variable, the flow. Yeah. I declared here the flow along the edges can be 1 or 0. Or even in between some values, but in general it will be 1 or 0. And multiplied, if I would have here more than one patient, I could actually use also this n here in order to account for several patients traveling together. Okay, so we minimize the travel distance, and now what are the constraints we have to follow? I mentioned before already the capacity in a hospital, and I want to be sure that we will not assign more patients than the outer circle here. So all the sum of those patients that are assigned to this clinic should actually be less or equal this large number n of the clinic, which we have here, the capacity. And finally, there can be some solutions, as I did not assign here this as a binary variable. So I could actually divide a patient in two parts and send one half of the patient to one clinic and the other part to another clinic. Now, this is not a realistic solution, but the optimization engine does not know that. So I kind of here say I want to have a full patient assignment constraint. That means if a patient arrives in one clinic, he should actually arrive entirely in the clinic and only not in a fraction of his body. This is just sometimes necessary. You can actually declare this variable here as binary, then you have a mixed integer problem. So it takes a little bit longer to solve. And then you just say solve, and you can write out in a similar way how you read here the data. I did not show this, and you can run those reports. Okay, I'm at the end of my presentation. Provided your input data are valid and correct, you can solve complex interdependent decisions with operations research, OR, for capacity planning, service levels, operative risks, also for the catchment areas of emergency services. But my experience also to critically question all such IT solutions. The COVID-19 data are always late and not very accurate, even if you use nowcasting. How about those cases that are asymptomatic? And if you have a system that optimizes and that uses data that is late and not very accurate, I'm asking you, I mean, there are autonomous cars now. Would you drive with an autonomous car or sit in an autonomous car that looks only in the back mirror? Yeah. Do you really feel safe in that? You have to be very careful with this. And there's a nice saying here. It's not from me. If you plan, you will be wrong. The more detailed you plan, the more coincidences may surprise you and your plan. The less detailed you plan, the easier it is for unforeseen coincidences to change your plan outcome. And the more coincidences may occur, the more urgent is the plan. And if you do not plan, you will never know if you were right. And this is not from me, this is Franz Luwein. And actually, if you research it, you will get it maybe in German language, which is more pregnant. I tried to translate it the best I could. But this is a dilemma of plans. And I have implemented several optimization solutions. And it's true, these are always problems you have to deal with. And you have, at the end, also use, let's say, human reasoning to also before you implement actions.
I have some nice comment here from one of the audience saying the man is planning and God is laughing.
The man is planning and God is laughing. Yes, exactly.
I like that kind of listing you've just brought with planning. It leaves me a little bit desperate, no? So what shall we do now? So especially the one sentence you brought here on your slide. Do you really want to sit in an autonomous car whose system look only in the back mirror? So my question just to you back would be, what's the alternative to it? Is there a way to look forward and still being able to drive?
Well, what's the alternative? That's a good question. I would say you probably should plan, but you should not take your plan as the only truth. It should be distance to it a little bit and use it as a tool, but this is not a purpose for itself. And of course, sometimes you have very little time, and you should then test it very well, back test it. But as we've seen here in the last half year, there were so many new things popping up. Who would have ever thought that we'll get problems in meat processing companies Yeah, I mean, I would have always thought manufacturing companies like assembling lines in the car industries, this will be the worst. But I mean, that was for me a big surprise. Afterwards, everybody thought, yeah, clear, this is a very bad type of environment for business. Well, I didn't know that too much, but now it comes out, and you discover this.
So I think that might be, especially for nowcasting COVID-19, a very harsh problem, right? Because the data situation has been extremely bad in some way.
Yes, actually, I have one slide here also. Nowcast use cases in other areas. I just researched that a little bit, and just to compare, I mean, the setting of COVID-19, the Corona time, half a year, that was new for the entire world. And here we have some cases that are very, very well known in economics. This is also interesting. Everybody's interested in GDP, gross domestic product. How much does the economy produce and grow? And this is also a number that is part of an official statistic process. And you only get the number published a quarter later. But you can run methods, statistical methods. You can use the historical data and use some early indicators, consumption index surveys, or here, for example, some people use data, electronic payment data. I don't know whether you get this from PayPal or maybe from Visa or MasterCard, or you use actually container shipments that is known already, or how many containers are on the ships that are already on sea traveling around. You can call this real-time numbers, and you can, for the past, estimate those models and then use them on the new numbers of container shipments or electronic payments, and you get an estimate whether the GDP will grow or not. And of course, this is interesting for investment decisions, this is a big issue for economics. The other thing is meteorology. This is when you have tropical storms or thunderstorms. And I think this is a little bit different because you have these very, very large meteorological models with partial differential equations. They run on huge servers and they calculate everything around the world. But if you want to actually forecast how a thunderstorm front will move through an apical couple of islands for the next 2 to 6 hours in order to warn the people, you need some other models that are faster, that have no partial differential equations and so on. And there, nowcasting is used as a tool to predict flash floods and basically other things that make endanger people who live there in order to warn them. These are the two other use cases I was able to research and find out. I'm not sure whether somebody in the audience has some other use cases of nowcasting.
Let's keep a question for the audience. Anyone who would like to comment here is free to do that. I like that. I was just remembering an article I read some weeks ago about the GDP you mentioned here, nowcasting and forecasting the GDP. As you said, we have a problem that it usually can only be done on a quarterly base. But nowcasting is actually a method to have that kind of immediate reactions to predict GDP outcome. And I heard one of the metrics was actually the rise of traffic of vans on motorways, which were used to measure the import-export changes. This was amazing. This was like, okay, much more observable variables which are changing over time, which can be used to predict the long-term thing.
Yeah. And where do you get these variables from?
I think they took it from statistics again, so from numbers which were accessible by, I'm not sure, Statista again. I need to look it up. But I read about it, and I think there were 2 or 3 more examples of metrics which are really short-term and observable and much easier to access. I will let you know. I will check it up.
Okay.
Also, meteorology is it's absolutely interesting. So weather conditions. I know what we will have at the Data Festival. One of the topics will be the weather impact on business. And this is, of course, something we have in the gut feeling. We know that bad weather, good weather, what's happening outside if it comes to e-commerce. It's pretty clear, and it's raining outside. Nobody likes to go outside for shopping, but we do it online. So online shopping increases and such stuff. So this is also pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And having that kind of forecasting, it's awesome. By the way, this is fascinating in Bavaria because I have an app on my smartphone which warns me if there's a storm coming up. The cool thing is, it's usually 10 minutes too late to warn me. I guess it's just because the people are still in home office and not that fast as when we were before at the office.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for these examples. Yelena is asking, what is your prediction about a second COVID-19 wave? Have you had some thoughts about that?
Well, I would say we should be all on alert, but I think in the first half of this year, all countries went through a cycle of, let's say, first curiosity, then denial, then, oh, maybe there's something to it, and then we really have to do something, and they did something. And now I think we are actually in a situation where the public health officials and the countries are much better prepared, and they will actually be able to react appropriately and actually guide us also a little bit better. I have no prediction on a second wave. I would say I want to go to holidays next week and thereafter also, and I'll look at the numbers where I go and I'll be careful. But I think, I hope we have it after us, the big wave, and we'll be able to keep the numbers low, behaving accordingly.
Yeah, so I think we will probably have 2 effects. We can observe it just from the holidays now, and it will probably take some time because of the delay of all the information, as you mentioned. And we will see what autumn will bring. So I know from here, the region is very sensitive, and I know that we have some discussions of some people who just started to refuse to wear masks, for example, and try to be more, claim more freedom in what they do. But from here, from the region in Bavaria especially, I can say most people are really still focused on keeping the measures alive, so that we can have low numbers and nobody is just suffering anymore from that lockdown things. Yeah. So I get a lot of feedback, just always just a lot of thank yous, and was quite interesting topics, and so very well presented. Thanks for also sharing all your insights. I think you're such a rich person if it comes to insights and data science. Awesome that you joined us today. Thanks again all for people who were just part of it. Thanks for joining us, and we will see each other next time. The recording will be available tomorrow. I will get the recording later and we'll make it prepared for tomorrow, and will be posted on the AI Suisse channel on YouTube. So thanks again for all of you. Thanks, Ulrich, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.